My ex-husband left the son with me for a weekend and never came back. So, when he showed up 3 years later with a sob story and a checkbook, I looked him dead in the eye and told him his son was better off in the system. 3 years ago, my then-husband David, who was 31 at the time, told me he had a sudden out-of-town team-building retreat with his new company. He packed a small bag, kissed me goodbye, and asked me to look after his 8-year-old son, Noah, from a previous relationship. He said it would just be for the weekend, that it was a great opportunity for him to bond with his new colleagues. I was 28, we had been married for just over a year, and I loved Noah. He was a quiet, sweet boy who loved drawing and building elaborate Lego structures. Of course, I said yes. I saw it as a chance for us to have some fun bonding time. Just the two of us. The weekend came and went. Monday morning arrived, and David didn't. I called his phone. It went straight to voicemail. I sent texts. They remained unread. A cold knot of anxiety began to tighten in my stomach. I tried calling his office. The number was disconnected. A frantic search online revealed the company he said he worked for didn't exist. I called his parents, his sister, his friends from his old job. It was like he had vanished into thin air. No one had heard from him, or so they claimed. I felt the walls of our small apartment closing in on me. After 2 days of pure panic, I tore the apartment apart, looking for a clue, anything. I found it tucked inside one of his old guitar cases, behind a stack of sheet music. It was a letter addressed to no one, just a rambling confession. He wrote that he was sorry, but he had met someone else. Her name was Cassandra. He said he had never gotten over her, that their reconnection had been intense and unavoidable. He wrote that he felt trapped in our life, that the responsibility of being a husband and a father to Noah was suffocating him. He and Cassandra were going to start a new life on the West Coast, free from obligations. The most chilling part was about Noah. He called him a millstone around his neck, a constant reminder of a past mistake. He wrote that he knew I was a good person and that I would know what to do with him. He was leaving him in my capable hands. I remember sinking to the floor, the paper crumpling in my fist. The betrayal was a physical pain. But the shock was immediately overshadowed by a more pressing reality. Noah was in his room, quietly coloring, completely unaware that his father had just thrown him away like yesterday's trash. I didn't have the luxury of falling apart. I had a child to take care of, a child who was not legally mine. I spent the next week in a daze, trying to figure out my options. I loved Noah, truly. In the year I had been in his life, he had become my world, but I was alone. I had a decent job, but it wasn't a high-paying one. The cost of childcare, health care, the sheer emotional weight of raising a child single-handedly after such a devastating betrayal. It felt impossible. The sheer cruelty of David's abandonment made the idea of stepping into the role he had so callously vacated feel tainted, overwhelming. I felt like I was drowning. After many tearful nights and desperate consultations with a legal aid lawyer, I made the most difficult decision of my life. I contacted Child Protective Services. I explained the situation, showed them the letter. It was officially declared abandonment. Since David's parents were elderly and in poor health, they were unable to take Noah in. Cassandra's family wanted nothing to do with him. For a few weeks, Noah was placed in a temporary foster home. It broke my heart every single day. I visited him as much as I was allowed, and seeing the confusion and hurt in his eyes was a special kind of torture. Finally, his maternal aunt, a woman named Rebecca, who lived in a neighboring state, was located. She had lost touch with the family after falling out years before, but when she heard about Noah, she didn't hesitate. She and her husband had a stable home and 2 younger kids of their own. They agreed to take him in. The court eventually terminated David's and Cassandra's parental rights, and Rebecca and her husband were granted full legal guardianship. It was the best possible outcome in a horrible situation. I kept in touch with Rebecca. She sent me photos and updates, and I visited a couple times a year. Noah was safe, he was loved, and he was thriving in his new family. He called me Andy, and that was enough for me. It had to be. The years passed, 3 of them. I worked on myself, went to therapy, tried to rebuild my life from the shattered pieces David left behind. The trust issues were profound, a deep crack in my foundation. I moved to a new apartment, started a new job. I was dating a little, but it was hard to let anyone in. The ghost of David's betrayal was a constant companion. Then, last Tuesday, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the peephole, and my blood ran cold. It was David, and standing beside him, looking frail and much older than I remembered, was Cassandra. A part of me wanted to never open that door, to pretend I wasn't home. But another, angrier part needed to look him in the eye. I needed to see what he had to say for himself. I opened the door. They both looked like they'd been through a ringer. David's face was etched with lines I didn't remember, and Cassandra had a gaunt, weary look about her. "Lena," David began, his voice cracking. "God, it's good to see you." I didn't say anything. I just stood there, arms crossed, waiting. "We're so sorry," Cassandra chimed in, her voice a thin whisper. "For everything. We were young, we were stupid, we were selfish." David nodded vigorously. "It was the biggest mistake of our lives. We know that now. We've been through so much. We've grown up. Lena, we really have." They were both crying now, these performative, messy tears. I felt nothing but a cold, hard stone in my chest. "We want to make it right," David said, pulling a checkbook from his jacket pocket. The gesture was so vulgar, so utterly tone-deaf, it took my breath away. "We want Noah back. We're ready to be a family now. Just tell us where he is. We'll pay you for your trouble, for everything. Name your price. Just help us find our son." Our son, the words coming from his mouth, felt like a desecration. The audacity, the sheer unmitigated gall of it all, ignited a fury in me I didn't know I was still capable of. They thought they could just write a check and undo the last 3 years? That they could waltz back in and reclaim the child they had discarded like garbage? I looked at them, at their pathetic, crying faces, and I made a decision. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of knowing he was safe and happy with his aunt. They didn't deserve that peace. They deserved the same torment they had inflicted on me and on that little boy. "You're too late," I said, my voice eerily calm. "About 3 years too late." David's face crumpled. What do you mean?" "I couldn't do it," I said, locking my eyes with his. "I was young, I was alone, and my husband had just abandoned me with a child that wasn't mine. What was I supposed to do? So I did the only thing I could. I called the authorities. He went into the foster care system. I have no idea where he is now, or how he's doing. For all I know, he's been bounced from one home to another. But he's certainly not my problem anymore. And as far as the law is concerned, he hasn't been your son for a very, very long time." The silence that followed was deafening. Then a wail erupted from Cassandra, a raw, animalistic sound of grief. David stared at me, his face a mask of horror and disbelief. No, you're lying," he stammered. "You wouldn't have. You loved him." "I did," I said coldly, "but you made it impossible for me to keep him. You made your choice. Now live with it." I didn't wait for another word. I shut the door, leaning against it as their sobs and pleas echoed from the other side. I listened until I heard their footsteps retreating down the hall. Then and only then did I allow myself to slide to the floor and cry, not for them, but for the final, brutal closure I had just enacted. I called Rebecca immediately and told her everything. She was furious on my behalf and vowed that they would never, ever get near Noah. Then, seeking some kind of absolution, I called my mother. I explained what David had done and what I had told him. Her reaction stunned me. "Lena, that was cruel," she said, her voice heavy with disapproval. "Unnecessarily cruel. You should have just told them the truth and sent them on their way. To let them believe their child is lost in the system, that's twisted." I couldn't believe it. Twisted? After what he did to me? To Noah? They deserved worse. "We don't sink to their level. Lena, that's not who we are," she replied, and the disappointment in her voice was a fresh wound. We argued, a heated, painful spat that ended with her hanging up on me. We hadn't spoken since. It hurt deeply. My own parents, who had held me while I cried for months, thought I was a villain in this piece. A few days passed in a tense silence. My parents were still not speaking to me, and their judgment felt like a constant weight. I was starting to question myself when Rebecca called. "Lena," she said, her voice tense. "Cassandra showed up at my door today." My blood ran cold. "What? How did she find you?" "I don't know. Maybe David's parents finally cracked." She was alone. She looked sick, Lena. Really sick. She was begging to see Noah, saying she had a right as his mother. She insisted we were all lying, that she knew he was here. "What did you do?" "I didn't let her in, of course. I told her she was mistaken and that she needed to leave. She started crying. Then she started screaming, banging on the door. It was terrifying. Thankfully, Noah was at a friend's house after school. I threatened to call the police, and she finally left. This was escalating. Their desperation was making them bold and unpredictable. Rebecca and I agreed we needed to be vigilant. We theorized that David's parents, who had always enabled him, had probably given him Rebecca's address, piecing it together from old court documents or something. They were all failures as human beings. A couple of days later, the doorbell rang again. This time it was just David. He looked even more haggard than before. "Lena, please," he said the moment I cracked the door open, the chain locked firmly in place. "Just 5 minutes. Leave, David, or I'm calling the police right now," I said, my phone already in my hand. He broke down, right there on my welcome mat. "It's Cassandra," he sobbed. "She's sick, really sick. She has cervical cancer. We think it's our punishment, Lena, for what we did, for abandoning Noah, for hurting you. Karma finally caught up to us." He looked at me, expecting sympathy. I felt nothing. The story, whether true or not, changed nothing for me. "That's a very sad story," I said, my voice flat, "but it doesn't erase the past. It doesn't make you parents. Noah is not a consolation prize for your suffering. He's a person, and you lost the right to call him your son when you walked away. Please," he begged, "we just want to see him. We know he's with Cassandra's aunt. We just want one meeting. Talk to her for us. You're the only one she listens to." The sheer entitlement was breathtaking. "You have 30 seconds to get off my property before I dial 911, I said, holding up my phone. He backed away, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. Fine. I'm going. But it's the truth, Lena, about the cancer. I'm not lying about that. We're flying back to Oregon at the end of the week. We won't bother you again. Just tell her family, will you? Tell them she's sick. That's the last thing I'll ever ask of you." He turned and walked away, a broken man. I shut the door, my heart pounding. I didn't know what to believe. The cancer could be a manipulative lie, a final, desperate play for sympathy, or it could be the tragic truth. It didn't matter. Their suffering did not negate ours. I called Rebecca and told her everything David had said. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Cancer, she finally whispered. My God, she's still the woman who abandoned her child, Rebecca. I reminded her gently. Illness doesn't change that. I know, she said, her voice firming up. I know, and my priority is Noah, his stability, his happiness. He's finally settled. He's happy here. To bring his birth parents, with all their drama and their sickness, back into his life now, it would destroy him. It would confuse him and tear him apart. I can't do that to him. Maybe someday in the future, if he asks, we can tell him, but not now, and certainly not for their benefit. I felt a surge of relief. We were on the same page. So what do? We do nothing, Rebecca said. We protect our peace. We protect Noah. If they're really leaving, then let them go. For good this time. The week passed. There were no more visits. No more calls. They were gone. The storm had finally passed. Life slowly returned to a quiet normal. The only unresolved thread was the silence from my parents. It still hurt, a dull, persistent ache. But I had my friends, my support system, and they were unequivocally on my side. They helped me see that my reaction, while harsh, was a product of the immense pain I had been subjected to. I decided to stop waiting for an apology that might never come. I had spent enough time living in the shadow of other people's choices and their judgments. I focused on my work, on my therapy, on rebuilding the parts of me that David had broken. I started seeing a kind, patient man I met through a mutual friend, and for the first time, I wasn't sabotaging it with fear. One afternoon, about a month after David's last visit, I was cleaning out my closet and found an old box of photos. There were pictures of me and David, smiling, looking like we had a future. There were pictures of Noah building a Lego tower, his face scrunched in concentration. I didn't feel the sharp sting of pain anymore. It was more like a quiet, sad nostalgia for a life that was never real to begin with. I took the photos of Noah and put them in a small album. The rest, the ones with David, I dropped into a trash bag. I carried the bag downstairs and tossed it into the dumpster. It was a small, simple act, but it felt symbolic. I was finally throwing out the garbage. Walking back upstairs, I felt lighter. The past was where it belonged, behind me. My future, for the first time in years, felt like my own. I had been to hell and back, but I had survived. I had protected an innocent child as best I could, and I had finally stood up for myself. That wasn't cruelty. It was justice, and it was enough.